Here's one way to solve the problem in the last video. We can have our web server talk to a bunch of interfaces like authenticator, compressor, and logger. With this structure, the code in the handle method is going to look like this. First, we're going to authenticate the request. If it's sent by a valid user, then we're going to log the request, and finally, we're going to compress it. Now, as I told you in the last video, with this structure, the code in the handle method is very fixed. If you want to disable one of these steps in certain scenarios, you have to come back and change the implementation of the handle method. Also, if you want to add a new step at the beginning, in the middle, or at the end, again, we have to come back and change the implementation of the handle method. This violates the open-closed principle. We want our system to be open for extension and closed for modification. So what we really need is a processing pipeline. We can have a pipeline or a chain of objects. In this pipeline, we can have 3 objects like our authenticator, our logger, and our compressor. As you can see, each object only knows about the next object in the chain. And here's our request. We can send our request to this pipeline. First, our authenticator is going to take the request. If this request is sent by a valid user, then perhaps it's going to print a message on the terminal and pass the request to the next object in the chain. If this request is not sent by a valid user, then it's going to stop processing right there. So the other objects are not used. This is the idea behind the chain of responsibility pattern. Now let's see how we can model a pipeline like this. Basically, we need an abstract class called handler. This handler has a reference to itself. So it has a field called next, and the type of this field is handler. So with this, each handler can know about the next handler in the chain. If you have taken my data structures course, you know that this is what we call a linked list. Each node has a reference to the next node. Now, this class is abstract because here we have an abstract method called handle. At the time of implementing this class, we don't know how to handle a request. That is something that we need to determine in our concrete handlers. So we can create concrete handlers like authenticator and logger. And in this classes, we're going to implement the handle method. And here's our web server. So our web server is going to maintain a reference to the first handler in the chain. In this case, that's going to be our authenticator. But what is interesting here is that our web server is not talking to a concrete handler. It's talking to the handler interface. So it's completely decoupled from this concrete implementation. With this structure, the code in the handle method is going to look like this. We're going to take our first handler and call its handle method. And this is what we call the chain of responsibility pattern. Because with this pattern, we can build a chain of objects for handling a request. So next, we're going to implement this pattern in code.